Governments are supposed to protect their people. That's the promise, right? Safety, order, stability. But history tells a much darker story. From stolen children and secret experiments to mass famine and man-made disasters, the world has seen countless times when governments turned on their own citizens. And the consequences were catastrophic. These aren't conspiracy theories, they're historical facts that reveal what happens when power goes unchecked and humanity takes a backseat. Before we begin, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and drop a like if you believe the truth, even when it's dark, deserves to be told. This isn't an easy list, but it's one everyone needs to hear. One government used science to sterilize its people, another flooded entire cities on purpose, and one country literally kidnapped children to erase their culture. Let's begin the countdown of the 25 worst things world governments have ever done. 25. The Greenland Child Experiment. In the 1950s, Denmark tried to modernize Greenland by stealing 22 Inuit children from their families. Officials claimed it was a cultural exchange, but in reality, it was an attempt to create model Danes. The children were placed with Danish families, forced to abandon their language and culture. Many never saw their parents again. More than half died young. Decades later, the survivors described trauma that never healed. In 2020, Denmark officially apologized, but no apology could undo the destruction of an entire generation's identity. 24. America's eugenics program before World War II, the United States led its own genetic purity campaign. Starting in 1907, states legalized forced sterilization of anyone deemed unfit, people with disabilities, mental illness, or even those considered poor or immoral. By the 1930s, over 30 states had adopted these laws, and tens of thousands were sterilized against their will. Some states continued until the 1970s. This dark chapter inspired Nazi Germany's own eugenics policy, a haunting reminder that the roots of evil can grow anywhere, even in a democracy. 23. The Banda Islands Massacre. In the 1600s, the Dutch East India Company wanted a monopoly on nutmeg, then worth more than gold. When the Banda Islanders refused to give it up, the Dutch military invaded, enslaved survivors, and wiped out almost the entire population. Of the 15,000 islanders, only about 1,000 survived. It was one of the first recorded corporate government genocides, proving greed can be just as deadly as war. 22nd Operation Searchlight, Pakistan, 1971. Before Bangladesh existed, it was East Pakistan, and when its people demanded independence, the West Pakistani Army unleashed Operation Searchlight. On March 25, 1971, soldiers stormed cities, massacring students, intellectuals, and civilians. Thousands died in a single night. Over 9 months, millions were displaced, and nearly 300,000 to 500,000 civilians were killed. The campaign birthed the Bangladesh Liberation War, and one of the worst atrocities in South Asian history. 21. Canada's residential schools. For over 100 years, the Canadian government and churches ran institutions to assimilate Indigenous children. Over 150,000 kids were taken from their families. They were forbidden to speak their language or practice their culture, and many suffered abuse, neglect, and starvation. Thousands died. Their remains later found in unmarked graves. The last of these schools closed in 1996. Survivors still carry the scars of cultural genocide. 20. Croatia's children's concentration camp, World War II. Under the Ustaše regime in Nazi-controlled Croatia, the government built a concentration camp for children. Between 1941 and 1945, over 6,000 children, mostly Jewish, Roma, and Serbian, were imprisoned in brutal conditions. Many died from disease, malnutrition, or abuse. It remains one of the most horrifying examples of state-sponsored cruelty against the innocent. 19. The Jasenovac camps, Croatia. Beyond the children's camp, Croatia's fascist government built the Jasenovac complex, a network of death camps along the Sava River. Tens of thousands were executed using crude weapons. Some victims were even tortured with tools designed specifically for mass killing. Survivors describe scenes of horror that rivaled Auschwitz. 18. Sweden's forced sterilization. From the 1930s to 1975, Sweden sterilized over 60,000 people, mostly women, and without consent. The goal was to improve society by preventing reproduction among those considered unfit. Even worse, transgender people were legally forced to be sterilized before changing gender markers, a law that lasted until 2012. 17. The Herero and Nama genocide, German Southwest Africa. In 1904, Germany committed one of the first genocides of the 20th century. When the Herero and Nama people of Namibia resisted colonial rule, German forces drove them into the desert to die of thirst and starvation. Over 100,000 were killed. Those captured were placed in labor camps where many perished. Germany has since acknowledged the atrocity, but only after a century of silence. 16. Switzerland's neutral collaboration. Switzerland was officially neutral in World War II, but profited from the war anyway. Swiss banks hid Nazi assets, their factories supplied weapons, and they denied Holocaust survivors access to family accounts, citing privacy laws. Neutral, maybe on paper, but in practice, profit came before humanity. 15. Australia's internment camps. During both World Wars, Australia interned thousands of civilians with German, Italian, and Japanese heritage, many of them citizen. Families were torn apart, livelihoods lost, and countless people suffered because of fear and xenophobia. Rottnest Island, now a tourist spot, was once an Aboriginal prison, a reminder that paradise can hide painful history. 14. The Sand Creek Massacre, USA. In 1864, U.S. troops attacked a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho village in Colorado. Despite a flag of truce, soldiers slaughtered over 150 people, mostly women and children. The leader, Chief Black Kettle, had met President Lincoln personally and been promised protection. The massacre became one of the most shameful betrayals in American history. 13. The Yellow River Flood, China, 1938. In an act of desperation during the war with Japan, Chinese forces blew up river dikes to slow the Japanese advance. The result? One of the largest man-made disasters ever. Entire provinces flooded, over 800,000 civilians died, and millions were displaced. The river changed course forever, a literal scar on the land caused by war. 12. The Mexican repatriation, 1930s USA. During the Great Depression, the U.S. government deported up to 2 million people of Mexican descent, many of them American citizens. Families were loaded onto trains and buses, sent to Mexico without due process, and left to fend for themselves. Tens of thousands died along the way. The goal? Free up jobs. The result? A humanitarian crisis. 11. The February 28th massacre, Taiwan, 1947. Protests against corruption turned into a massacre when Taiwan's government opened fire on civilians. Thousands were killed, and the following decade, known as the White Terror, saw tens of thousands more imprisoned or executed for alleged dissent. For decades, even mentioning it was forbidden. 10. The Black War, Tasmania. In the 1800s, British colonizers turned Tasmania into a hunting ground for humans. Indigenous Tasmanians were killed, enslaved, or sold for bounty. Within decades, their population was nearly wiped out. The Black War remains one of the most complete acts of cultural extermination in colonial history. Which of these events shocks you most so far? The forced sterilizations or the deliberate man-made disasters? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And while you're here, like this video so we can keep uncovering the parts of history most people never talk about. 9. The Bodo League Massacre, South Korea, 1950. At the start of the Korean War, South Korea's government executed over 100,000 suspected communists, including civilians and former political prisoners. The killings were covered up for decades, and victims' families silenced by fear. Only in recent years has the truth come out. 8. Project Eldest Son, Vietnam War. The U.S. military secretly planted booby-trapped ammunition in enemy stockpiles, bullets and mortar shells designed to explode when fired. The plan caused chaos, but also horrific deaths. Some of the forged documents blamed Chinese factories, spreading paranoia among the enemy. It blurred the line between psychological warfare and outright cruelty. 7. The Magdalen Laundries, Ireland. For more than a century, Ireland and parts of the UK imprisoned fallen women, often unwed mothers, in institutions run by the church. They were forced to work in laundries, their children taken from them, and abuse was rampant. The last one closed in 1996. Thousands of women never escaped. 6. Sweden's World War II. Internment camps between 1940 and 1943, Sweden detained anyone seen as a threat. Political activists, refugees, even soldiers from neighboring nations. Conditions were harsh, and prisoners were subjected to racial studies and human experiments. Neutrality once again proved far from innocent. 5. Operation Legacy, Britain. As colonies won independence in the 1950s to 70s, Britain launched a secret campaign to destroy evidence of abuses committed during colonial rule. Thousands of files, torture reports, photographs, and testimonies were burned or shipped back to London under classified status. It was history rewritten by fire. 4. Agent Orange, Vietnam. Between 1961 and 1971, the U.S. sprayed 19 million gallons of Agent Orange across Vietnam to destroy forests and crops. The herbicide contained dioxin, one of the most toxic chemicals known. Millions suffered cancers, birth defects, and genetic damage, effects that still linger generations later. Even American veterans exposed to it carried lifelong illness. It's a legacy of war that refuses to fade. 3. The South Sulawesi Massacre, Indonesia. From 1946 to 1947, Dutch colonial forces in Indonesia executed thousands of civilians in retaliation for independence uprising. Entire villages were destroyed, records erased, and survivors silenced. Historians estimate up to 40,000 deaths, one of the most brutal colonial reprisals in Southeast Asia. 2. The silencing of Gary Webb. In the 1990s, journalist Gary Webb uncovered links between U.S. intelligence operations and the spread of crack cocaine in black communities. Instead of praise, he was discredited, attacked by major newspapers, and forced out of his career. In 2004, he was found dead from 2 gunshot wounds, officially ruled a suicide. His story is a warning. Exposing the truth can be deadly. 1. The Great Bengal Famine, 1770. When drought struck India's Bengal region, the British East India Company continued to collect heavy taxes and forced farmers to grow cash crops instead of food. The result was a famine that killed up to 10 million people, roughly 1/3 of Bengal's population. It wasn't just nature that caused this disaster. It was greed, policy, and deliberate indifference. These 25 tragedies show what happens when power turns predatory, when governments stop serving and start controlling. History can't be changed, but it can be remembered. And remembering means it's less likely to happen again. So tell me in the comments, which of these events do you think deserves to be taught more openly in schools? And if you believe the truth should never be buried, like this video, subscribe, and share it to help history reach more people.